So normally my intro stories are tied to the topic of the week, and I have to start out this episode by admitting that I've kind of painted myself into a corner this week. As I mentioned at the end of last episode, I have forgotten to ask our guest today how she pronounces her last name, and it got me to thinking about unusual last names, unique last names. And I struggled mightily with my name when I was young. I was always called Danny by my family because my grandfather was Dan. And I hated that, especially when I got to being a teenager. And I also hated the fact that my name was Danforth. It was weird. I wanted to be named John when I was 4 or 5. I named my koala bear, my stuffed koala bear, John, because I wanted a normal name. And I actually went by Walter one summer program, which infuriated my mother because Walter was my dad's dad and Danforth comes from her dad. So it got me thinking about my last name. When I first started out in business, most everyone would call me Dan. But I had a side business early on in my career. I did music promotion at nightclubs and concert promotion. And I also performed as a DJ. And one night I got done performing and my stage name was Fleek. It was just my last name. And this kid that I knew from that music scene came up to me and we were chatting and he says, Fleek, what's your last name? And I said, Fleek. And he got this quizzical look on his face and said, so your name is Fleek? And I said, yeah, that's my name.
Well, we'll have to consider the source. What time of the evening or morning? And what was it one of those raves, Dan?
I don't think actually it was. I think it was actually a nightclub event. So yeah, they were. We did do some garage parties, some warehouse parties, but we also did nightclub events. I'm pretty sure in my memory that it was actually a real nightclub event.
Well, for our listeners on that note, and I'm proud of you. Well done. Many of our listeners who knew and followed Prince in Purple Rain, of course, First Avenue in downtown Minneapolis. It was a great club. And
Yep.
A lot of great acts, top acts came there. And then when they arrived and they on the outside of the building after they played, etc., if the audience loved them and they knew they were a great attraction, there'd be the wall of fame and they'd put the star up
Right.
with the people's names. And I remember driving by there with my boys. They're all much younger than Dan, and and there's Fleek and Dr. Science, and I do a double take and go, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty funny story, actually, because that was actually a joke. The manager of First Avenue was a friend of ours, and as they were getting ready to repaint, her partner was also one of the management, and he asked her, hey, who are some electronic music acts that we can put up on here that have played here? And she jokingly said, oh, put Tyler and Fleek down. And so we got put on the list.
Dr.
Yeah,
Science.
Mr. Science. Yep, Mr. Science, my good friend and partner in a lot of things, Tyler Morsch. Yeah, so it and then it just never got taken off. And
no, I loved it. I'd keep going back because I worked downtown. I'd see it, or we went to the, of course, Target Center. Then there was the new TCF and etc. Yeah,
right. No, literally my 15 minutes of fame. So
you got a lot more than 15 out of it, brother.
With that, we will begin episode 40 of the Valuability Podcast. The Valuability Podcast is for financial professionals, business owners, and anyone interested in financial planning, business leadership, and personal development. We believe that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. My name is Danforth Fleek. I was a financial advisor and product wholesaler for over 20 years, and I'm joined each week by my co-host, friend, and mentor, Philip Simonson, who has been in financial services for over 40 years, also as a financial advisor, field leader, sales trainer, and a senior manager in areas such as advisor development and field operations. So, Philip, I want to take this opportunity to let our listeners know that we are going to take a 2-week break for the holidays. This will be our last episode before the holiday season, and we will be back in the first week of January. But what are your plans for Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa season?
Well, with the COVID, it's going to be pretty quiet. And now with the boys with their wives, we alternate Christmases or New Year's or the holiday season with every other year. But they all showed up in October because they were all going stir crazy and they wanted to get together and with this COVID. So just Lisa and I, very quiet.
All right. Well, my family didn't get together on Zoom for Thanksgiving, so apparently we have already frustrated each other in the digital realm as much as we do in person. So I'm not sure what we're going to do for Christmas time. So you can find the Valuability Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. You can also find it on our YouTube channel. Search Value-Ability on YouTube to find us there. Also, best way to find us is on our website, value-ability.com. Click on the episodes tab, and our player is there. Wherever you find us, please like, review, subscribe, and share. As always, sharing is the best thing that you can do for us. If you like what we're doing, please pass it on to someone that you think might be interested. If you'd like to get in touch with us, email info@value-ability.com. Again, that's info@value-ability.com, or you can reach us through our social media links. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook links are all at value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab. So we are going to jump straight into our main section for this week and join our conversation with Karen, and I'm going to give her last name a shot here, Wawrzaszek.
Nice. We'll know how well you did in just a matter of seconds.
So now as we start our main section for the week, Karen, as I just shared with you, Philip and I have an ongoing gag that he has a very terrible time with names. He actually doesn't have too bad of a time with names. He always gets the initials right, but he can never get the actual names right. And I had to admit that I didn't know how to pronounce your last name, and it is a challenging last name. I'm sure it gets totally butchered, so I'm going to give it a shot here. Wawrzaszek.
Oh my gosh. Spot on.
Yay!
That's spot on.
I keep wanting to say Wawrzaszek, which I'm sure you get, but I keep wanting to invert that, but excellent. I nailed it. Good.
Yeah, you're in the top 1%. That is excellent.
Don't tell me that. Philip's never going to hear the end of that now.
Right.
That's right.
That's a fact. And as our audience already knows, Karen, hear what I mean, not what I say, and we'll do just fine. But you brought, to our audience, Karen and I and Dan were talking ahead of time, and as Karen had mentioned, that in today's environment, there's just a lot of stress factors. And you think about just this year, we had COVID in March, and then all of a sudden, first time, everything shut down. The streets, there's hardly anyone on the streets. We're told not to go out. Then we've got all of a sudden our children. We got to learn. Parents have got to learn how to online learning. Some of them are, being furloughed or losing their jobs completely. Then we have this crazy election, and you're in the hub of the communication world. We have offices out in DC as well, and so what are we going to do with the election? So there's a lot of stress, and we know good stress. I always define good stress. If I know I'm going on holiday next week, it's amazing how many things I can get done. I'm really truly focused. But bad stress is, it hangs on too long, and then that's not good for obviously your health. And when that stress is high, it's not a good. You shouldn't be making. You got to be careful in how you're making decisions. So, Karen, my first question to you is if you're what pieces of advice would you give the consumer out there at the present time when if they got to make money decisions, particularly, or any big decisions, and financial advisors in helping coach their clients make good decisions that are aligned with, as we talk, their values?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And it's interesting, we're already in December, right? And we started the year really only thinking about, wow, this is going to be a big election year. History has shown us that that part of the year always invited some stress and some volatility around money, around the investment markets and the climate that people kind of have to feed into either through work or through investing. And then we were thrown a curveball, and the pandemic was upon us. People were very quickly quarantined, and a big part of the economy in that we don't really see it as part of the economy, but the student population K through 12 being sent home. So our public education represents more than 90% of the students. The average family contributes about $10 billion to GDP every week
Hmm.
the schools are shut down, right? So just that little sliver is noteworthy because it informed then the next several months of how families, consumers, investors, workers responded to how they were absorbing all of those unforeseen, unprecedented stresses. And oftentimes, for those of us, and I think the three of us talked about this briefly, but part of the role of financial advisors is a little bit of the behavioral management, has a lot to do with helping people navigate through difficult times so that they don't execute in disastrous ways, financial disastrous ways in those moments, because that may be kind of a behavioral imprint of theirs to feel safe, to feel secure, to get through that moment. And the moment is just that, right? It doesn't define your entire life. And it's important and where I've been spending a lot of time, and I focus in my practice on values aligned investing. Very specifically, I head our firm's impact oriented investment offering, building out that platform, but also work on the other side in the community as an activist in the nonprofit sense with foundations. Also, a set of values alignment and mission alignment, and then together with individuals and families. And what you ended up seeing very quickly from between March and even until Giving Tuesday just ended for us, which was a very different Giving Tuesday than the inception of the Giving Tuesday programs. And what you ended up seeing is families trying to, especially parents, trying to multitask and remain employed if they were fortunate enough to be in professions that they could safely work from home and had choice versus those that have no choice. So
Right.
families that are really living on the brink, living below the poverty line already, being pushed further down, and then also having to become the primary educator caretaker of the children in competition with them finding employment or replacing income. One of the biggest stressors in American life is, do I have enough income? And we are consistently polled as working too many hours as measured by any country in the developed world. And a new study just came out last week that ticked that up another few hours. And which is interesting, right? And so helping people as an advisor kind of think about their current actions in this moment and how they're reacting to stresses, particularly around money behaviors, so that they come out of this pandemic and out of this experience and parts of this experience we are all in it together, but we're all not sharing the same experience in it together. And how do those families continue to meet their education, retirement, other funding and savings goals has been the largest bulk of time that I've spent is really around the kind of money behaviors and helping people feel confident in what programs, financial planning programs we've helped put in place with them, and then also navigating the investment markets that fund those, right? That also has come with um, very unusual volatility. That a little bit of it was the election, but not as measured by historical terms. And there's been one thing after the next in 2020 that has been a new
Oh,
stress, and depending on the family you are, if you're a family of color who's having a different experience through some of what we were trying to grapple with in system change around Black Lives Matter and police violence, that's a different experience layered on top of a pandemic and trying to educate children at the base of it, restoring an economy through helping people feel more comfortable and safe in their livelihoods is a big part. It should be a big part of all of our goals, right?
right.
However that looks into 2021. And so I offer that as kind of a starting point to our conversation because I think
Mm-hmm.
the behavioral finance components are threaded through everything we do, no matter where we live in the wealth rankings, right?
So, yeah, that's very good. And I lived overseas and I lived in England for almost 5 years with our family, setting up a financial planning company for American Express. And one of the things that my British mates and friends taught me that resonated. Look, Americans, you work to live, and we uh, no, they work to live, and we live to work, and hence, like you said, those hours going up. Then the other, but it's so again, it's a paradigm shift. But as you said, tying back to values, and values are internal, and so how do you work with clients? For we can talk about nonprofits as well, but I'm thinking the process is still the same. How do you help them determine their top five values? Because I've read and what when I work with advisors, your top 15 values don't change over your lifetime, but the priority of them will.
Mhm.
So, example, venture. I'm not bungee jumping anymore after you have grandchildren. You had three sons, etc. But adventure is just tapered down. I still want to travel, do things, and I do take risks, but not they're a little more calculated risks at the present. But so how do you align then those values to the goals to the decision making? Because that's
Yeah.
important. Because I also I can't quote, but to sustain optimal performance, because we're going to have highs and we're going to have lows. Life is a journey. It's not a prepackaged tour. So you're going to have these crises like we have now. And you know, to sustain optimal performance comes down to talent. That's what you're born with. Many of good at math or good athlete, etc. Music. Then it's skills, which are honed over one's lifetime, and then it's decision making. And decision making is 2 times more powerful, is what they found, than talent and skills. So once you got the values, once you got the goals, how do you help them make better decisions that are in alignment?
Yeah, and it is all about alignment at the end of the day. And it's one thing, and you kind of touch on this, it's one thing to have a set of values, but if you don't know how to action those and get to implementation, it's not as effective, right? It's merely an observation of a value. And so one of the things I do is a kind of a workshop of sorts. A lot of our values are rooted in what I call childhood imprints, right?
Mm,
We learn some of our core values in our memories we don't recall, right? But we behave a certain way because it was modeled before us, or we think about a good example that I work through a family with recently is a core value in the family is equity, right? Meaning fairness or equity. And how that presents in the family around consumption is important. Do I fund, is it because I have a value of equity? Do I fund all of my grandchildren equally for their education programs that I'd love to see happen, right? Is it expressed in that way? And then when you take that and you extrapolate that out to an investment actionable, now you're thinking about, okay, am I investing in community in an equitable way? Am I investing in companies that are doing more harm than good? And
Hmm.
does that violate my construct and system around equity? And in this moment in time, that has been I would say, the number one value that is surfacing, because I agree exactly with what you said around we reprioritized, and that's just our frontal lobe telling us, hey, here's
Yeah,
what's
prefrontal
really
cortex.
it does. This is important right now. If we don't give it attention now, things are going to get worse. We don't know why or how, but we respond almost instinctively that way. And that set of values then kind of supersedes something that's a little less priority in that moment. And so values around community started to surface in families. Well, gosh, I really feel um, that I'm not alone. I shouldn't think about just my needs. How am I actually supporting those around me that I'm affecting, and what does that look like, and how does that translate to a financial plan or an investment program? And you start to then pick apart you know a set of solutions that speak to that. Here's a company that actually, a good example is, if I believe in equity and fairness and diversity, well, I want to ensure that I'm aligned and giving, investing in a company that's actually thinking about all of its stakeholders and not just maybe the shareholders, right? And so that's been a pivot this really
Hmm.
prior to this year, is stakeholder capitalism. And a lot of that comes back to being rooted in values around equity and inclusion. And companies, there, great finance companies that exist right now that we're invested in through our programs, that are looking up and down the supply chain, up and down the employee set. And is my health program inclusive for all? Do I have programs that are childcare supplemental programs that are meeting the needs of my lowest ranked, lowest paid workers, right? And actually, am I investing in community? Am I investing in employee training and development and skill development, right? Or am I just serving the top of the house? That is coming front and center this year during COVID, as you can appreciate, when everybody's going back home, and now you're creating these new work environments that are no longer bricks and mortars, but they're supported virtually in kind of new cultural workplace maps, right? and
Right.
and that's harder to be the worker than is that's on site, visible to the leaders that influence where you go next, how you get paid next, and do I get promoted. That's a shift, right? And so making sure that you're investing in companies that are governed well, that are meeting needs of all the stakeholders, because at the end of the day, that will ensure the sustainability of that company, and that's a measure of risk management. So that construct can be worn on myself, the practitioner's hat, and then it can also be worn on the investor's hat, who says, okay, I get that. I might not be a sustainable corporation. That investment might be, a kind of fleeting, if in fact I have high turnover, employee turnover, or bad partnership deals with strategic partners in my supply chain, because all of these bad things they're doing, then you no longer get into kind of generational existence. And one of and this is really kind of a new phenomenon, but the millennials, Gen Zers, we're older on this crowd, so we're not factored into the data on this, but they're raising their hand and they care almost at an overwhelming majority about governance in a company and about equity in a company. And so, even not just from the investment perspective, but even on the values alignment for your own, how you personally want to carry out the days of your life, you're going to be very likely to turn over your employment and your company if they don't meet your values. And I think that's a really important thing for a CEO or an executive to think about when designing policies, employment practices, and benefits programs. to help ensure a stickier workforce that we all know lead to stickier ongoing revenue, bottom line,
Cool.
share price growth, right? And that's kind of how I think about that and plan around that.
That's very good. Thank you.
Obviously, many I see many advisors that come to the profession thinking that it's portfolio management, right? Like
Yeah.
numbers and asset allocation, and then they find out that, as Philip says, there's this whole social aspect to it. And the successful ones realize then that they need to it's a lot of times way more about marketing than actually the process, right? Building your business. But then also it's helping people manage their emotions around money. And we talked multiple times on the podcast about how much clients accept that, right? Like my experience being in a small retail bank was that customer base, when I started out with, so, what are your retirement goals? Just rejected it, right?
Hmm.
They would not go down that road. They were used to transactional. They wanted, I got $10,000 in my checking account. What do I do with it? And so I had to adapt to a less social focused approach. So obviously clients kind of accept that more or less. Do you see the clients that really engage with the values based approach having a significantly different experience from those clients that don't as much engage
Yeah.
with that process?
Yeah, I actually, and one of the process of a technique I use is goals-based planning. And so to get at what you were talking about, that's exactly right. If you ask someone, what are your retirement goals? And that's just a big open-ended question that is very intimidating and very threatening to the existence of how many years I have in retirement. It's like, what are you asking me? Do I want to go hiking or do I have enough money? What's really
Right.
layered in the question? And people don't oftentimes, you may have a number, and what I think about is in retirement is a goal in the framework of goals-based planning can be a goal. And really what I find people are after when you kind of start to unpack that is, I want to sleep at night, I don't want to outlive my money,
Mm-hmm.
and they're less concerned with the choice of investment that you're making, that transactional piece. Absent this, is it going to meet the goal of me sleeping at night and not outliving my wealth? Whether you so One of the goals in the framework can very well be retirement planning, right? And so I'll sit down and I'll usually even ring fence, here are the kinds of assets that meet that goal. They are more likely to ensure that you don't outlive your money. They are going to meet risk criteria that help you sleep at night, and and then that's one subset. And then another goal might be in a family, I really want to have some opportunity. I want to be able to take advantage of opportunities as they come up because I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm introduced to big ideas sometimes, and I might want to start a business or go into partnership. And how can you help me build a financial plan that eventually seeds those opportunities? And I'll ring fence those kinds of investments in a behavioral goal around opportunities. And you start to build out. So usually my presentations really never include a spreadsheet. I'm kind of known for that. They are not, I don't believe in a wall of numbers. I'll even have, quite simply, if you can just imagine right now visually, a blank piece of paper with three boxes, and let's say they compartmentalized a goal of retirement and um, non-traditionally earned income, right? As a how I spend the next 30 years. We use the word retirement, but oftentimes now what I find is, no, that's just time I want to have choice, and I no longer want to be um, kind of restricted to traditional employment. I'm done with that chapter. But I might consult, I might serve on a board, I might have some income here and there, right? If people really want to kind of stay intellectually engaged, and how do you support that as a goal in a financial plan? Right. And then kind of your how do I involve my family in legacy and engagement around my money? And whether a family gave together, developed a philanthropy program together, how do I continue that goal as part of my financial plan? So these boxes for me, when I'm working with clients, contain that top goal, and they're not financial goals, as I just said. They're these softer goals that then can be populated with ideas as to how you meet those. And they're separate and distinct from each other. And the reason that's important in goals based planning is because the sleep at night piece is that, okay, two of these three, the we'll call retirement and family gifting, need to be separate and not influence what this opportunistic goal bucket looks like. I want to be
Sure.
able to separate that so that I can always do that. And I know that's now set up and protected, much like a college fund, right? Where you can't invade it for other reasons. And helping people feel very secure about, oh, I'm going to meet these goals if I take these actions. And then you kind of create the optimal investment programs that meet the goal. But a lot of times people get in the way of, and this is the kind of behavioral kind of finance part of advisory, is helping people in that big moment where they are the reason they might not perform investment wise. It's not going to be the markets typically, right? It's
Investments
going to
work, investors don't. You've got
that's
that right.
because you have three things that contribute, right? You can control your spending, and that improves your investment program. You can be strategic and smart about taxes. That controls your performance. And then you can actually decide how long it is until you start to draw down a portfolio to meet your needs. So the investor actually has all the power, and what you have as an advisor is helping them exercise that power in moments where they have mental strength to not execute on something like this year, where you're in a moment of a lot of stress, as we talked about earlier. Don't go in and do something really disastrous to that long term plan, because this is a moment in time and that is the rest of your time. And helping people kind of appreciate that and step back and say, okay, I'm going to weather this little storm in the markets. I'm going to, maybe it's actually an opportunistic time to reallocate and actually take on more risk assets to meet this opportunity goal we keep talking about, right? So you can actually introduce conversations that now move away from the kind of numbers of it and into, okay, actually I'm going to see this for an opportunity that we've talked about for years, Karen, these other goals. Now we have an opportunity to populate those goals with some ideas. And that's really powerful. And it's a different approach. Again, I never go in with a wall of numbers. I don't myself like that. We all have people we work with, even as advisors in our own lives, right? People helping me do things. And I don't enjoy the very technical conversation that's in the weeds about the decimal points. And so I think to myself, okay, who does? And let me be very observant about the client and aware, respect and honor that, pay attention to that, because if they need that, then there's a reason they need that to feel to again get going in the right behavior. If someone needs information in a different way than I do, honor that and provide that and help them understand what that information is going to do to drive the behavior they want to see in themselves. And
That's that's I like what you just said there, and to me, what resonated, that's social awareness skills,
mhm,
and you're able to read both the verbal, the nonverbal, and the actual chosen words they're using to understand what they need, and then adjusting your front porch to meet it. And I also like what you
mhm,
said there. I frame it as in helping my clients during those high emotional stressful times, of come down to emotions. There's the negative, highly negative, and there's the highly positive. Highly negative, anger, anxiety, amygdala hijack takes place, and that cortisol drug gets released, and that blocks you from accessing the prefrontal cortex of the
Mhm.
brain from our Neanderthal days, because it's the fight or flight syndrome, and you got to protect, save the oxygen, so that so the blood, so you can make that decision. And then, of course, on the positive, where you're exuberant and everything's running great and you're high on life, well, the dopamine gets released. In either of those cases, it's not a good time to make decisions. And I like to call that's, in working with clients, that's the time to press that pause for cause button and go back and recognize, one, how they're feeling. Then two, let's reflect back on, as you started off here, Karen, what are those values and how do they, and the decision you want to make right now. And then we line those values to the goals. Let's reflect on that and let's reframe, and then let's respond to it. And I
That's
think
right.
that's where, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say before I lost my thread there on the dopamine, and because I agree, both the high and the low are a really terrible place to make a key decision in your life, and you want to find that place of balance, right, where you have mental balance, you're receiving information and processing it in a way that's going to not be destructive to you. So I completely agree with that, and that's kind of where we all try to get at this in advisory land is, okay, do I have is my emotional quotient high enough? Is my social awareness high enough that I'm
Right.
observing that that client is actually really emotionally reacting to something that if they could pause for a minute and wake up tomorrow or the next day and the facts looked different, would they make a different decision? And the answer is yes, most times. And so it's like holding their hand and
Mm-hmm.
getting to that point, getting over that bridge to then say, okay, I can breathe. I didn't fall off the bridge, and the goals will still be successful.
Yeah, great point. And it's that old saying, you make reversible decisions quickly, irreversible decisions slowly.
I love
And
that.
so that's, take your time. I mean, that Lincoln was, as I go back, you're in DC as one of the presidents, and he would he'd oftentimes get mad at those generals, and he would write the letters. But he, and of course that was the mode of communication, and give it to someone on horseback, deliver it to the general, you're fired. He would put it in his desk drawer, and then he'd go to sleep, and then he would reread it the next day, and then he
Yeah.
would make his decision, because he knew, just like a good judge, they're taught the very first time. I joke, my boys, great, great. No, my grandfather was a Supreme Court justice. So, around our dinner tables around holidays, there's oftentimes a lot of, there were debates and decision, and what we learned with that is that, look, a good judge, if the verdict comes in, they do not pass the sentencing on that day, because they know the motions are running high. So they will
Hmm.
take time and come back 2 weeks later or whatever. We'll reconfirm that we'll reconfirm it, readjourn, and at such and such date. So
Yeah, and that's smart.
yeah, it's smart, right? Decision making is 2 times more powerful than talent and skill. And how
Yeah.
many times have we seen professional athletes, professionals? They're all morally intelligent, but sometimes they're just not morally competent. They know what the right things are to do, but they don't do them. Madoff, he was morally intelligent,
Oh, absolutely. But yeah,
but
he
not
didn't do the
morally
right things.
competent.
No, that's right. And what's interesting you kind of touch on is there's some really great study out of Stanford around how again, all in the area of behavior and figuring out what those motivators are. But studies around the actions we take today, would we make choices if we knew our future self would be better off or worse off based on the actions we do today? And the study revealed most of us will not cease a bad habit for an extended period of time, for example. So take smoking. You know your future self will be much better off if you stop smoking, right? But we talk ourselves into these little additions that all add up to, it's like the death by a thousand cuts. They add up to what ultimately is, okay, I'll just have one more cigarette or I'll do whatever. And then you fast forward and now you might be at risk for lung cancer or other cancers, and you knew this,
Mm-hmm.
right? You knew that was the future self, but you didn't do anything. And it's all about connecting not just the knowledge, but the motivator. Like where do I actually find the motivation to continue to carry out and change a habit? And that isn't dissimilar for how we treat money behaviors. We know that if we save more today, we're better off in the future. Money doesn't magically appear for all of us when we retire. I'm sad to say. I wish that it did. But as we can see in our country with the savings rates, we're in jeopardy of more people at risk of not outliving their assets, right? Or outliving their assets, sorry. And so if we know that, and we know the future self will be better off saving little by little, and because it's less painful to chip away at it than to come in 20 years later and try to super fund a goal, it's much better to build a financial plan that meets it along the way in a slower measured pace. And that's hard for the dopamine junkie, right?
Oh,
So when you observe this about a client and you're like, okay, well, if that client has this type of personality and they really get fueled by market highs and extreme opportunities, unique opportunities, and they might very well be someone who needs that adrenaline, needs the dopamine flood to the brain. How do you replicate and moderate that experience, right? So that the slow and steady that is meant to meet that 20-year future self goal isn't disrupted with the kinds of activities that will yield the dopamine rush, right?
mm-hmm.
And so figuring out those motivators and helping moderate what those are is, I think, a big part of the riddle to solve when you're in kind of a goals-based behavioral financial planning role. And you have this really amazing influence over, where that capital moves and how it grows to
Right.
meet the values, and even the world's values, not just yours. But right now we're even looking at our own values and thinking, okay, where do they fit in on the investment side into what the world has determined are about 17 through the Sustainable Development Goals, values that have surfaced into these primary issues of our time that we need to solve. And do my values, can I align those to those particular goals set forth by the United Nations in an investment program? And yes, you can, right? And so it's connecting yet again what my value on, economic justice is, racial justice, equity up and down the chain, employee and stakeholder capitalism, all of those things, clean energy and environment, all the things that people care about. And so it's kind of getting at those issues and less about the kind of money piece of it, that kind of cause the rush sometimes for folks.
Yeah, great point.
Quick question: when you're building a plan, and I've never thought about it from this standpoint, it really makes me think about the approach to investing that institutions and foundations take. Or I always talked about when I was working for an insurance company, I would always say, look, the actuaries like to just take this pile of money, tie it up with this liability over here, put a bow on it and put it on the shelf for 20 years. Right. And then they forget about it because they know, hey, this bucket of bonds is going to mature. At this point, we're going to pay off this liability and we'll have this little bit of profit left over. But this is essentially the same type of approach at the individual level. Do you actually then name the assets in a way that they can tie it directly to those goals?
And the
So that,
values.
for an example, you say the opportunity side is getting beaten up in a certain year, where you can then point out, hey, look, that's your opportunity bucket. Yes, that's getting dinged, but over here is our retirement bucket, and this is performing differently. Do you actually then, like on an account level, like separate those out
Oh,
so that they
you
can mentally
absolutely,
see
yeah.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Interesting.
create that. And so what's really cool about what you just said is this opportunity, we'll kind of play with this opportunity bucket for this conversation because it feeds a couple of things we've been talking about. For some investors, the ones that definitely need they need the dopamine rush. You've identified, oh, hey, I need to have this thing. And if you can ring fence that, and then you can pull that back in at the right time, say, hey, here's actually, this is the set of investments in that goal that are meeting your need, your emotional and behavioral need in that moment. And then don't disrupt all this other stuff, remember. All of this other stuff over here are meeting these goals, and you can demonstrate that, which is really cool because it helps someone kind of moderate and say, oh, that's right, I'm ring fencing this specifically to get that kind of engagement I need to get, and it's going to meet that goal, that financial hurdle, as well as the other things that the reasons we do things aren't always just about money, right? There's a sense of other fulfillment that we need to solve,
Hmm.
and whether it's an investment or whether it's a charitable endeavor, or whether it's, if you're church going, we do all the things we do have an outcome that we're looking for. We're looking for some place to land that energy, right? And whether that's money or whether it's behavior, you're looking for a landing spot for it. And and this isn't different. And so to my mind, and so that's what's pretty cool about, the personality that does experience the highs and lows differently than some people that can kind of just sit and coast for a while, and they've embraced the ups and downs. They're over it, don't need to talk about it all the time, and they're just looking out in the horizon. And so that's great, but not everybody's like that, right? And how do you actually come in and keep reminding someone that, all these little additive steps are, they're adding to your plan, or they're subtracting from them, because you don't notice things in little micro snippets, right? When I do a thing, it's like, another analogy I like to use is, like weight loss and diet, right? And so we all have our stories here, right? Everyone does. And I know sugar is bad, and I sit and think, oh gosh, but I'll confess, I love cookies, I love sugar, and I know my future self will be terrible. I won't be in good health. I will be, a health risk to our system if I eat those things every single day, right? And so, but in the moment, you can talk yourself into having a cookie, and then it's the slow bleed, right? You start to have another one and another one and another one, because it's starting to fix, and you start to forget that, though in the aggregate that was a lot of cookies, because in just that moment you just had one, right? And we rationalize our behaviors this way, and we can all relate to the diet story. And I think I
Yes.
ate a half a pie on Thanksgiving, right?
I
And my future self is going to hate me.
I call that, a friend of mine used to call that, he said, "I'm going on the round diet." And I said, "What's the heck is the round diet, Bob?" He says, "Yeah, you gotta get rid of pies, you gotta get rid of ice cream, you gotta get rid of cookies, you gotta."
Oh, I love that.
Makes
I
pretty
may
good
borrow
sense.
that.
Now, Karen, if you were in Dan's or my shoes, what would you have asked yourself that we didn't?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You guys, are really, keenly aware of and interested in how behavior, kind of affects, whether we live a good life or we don't, right? And so, I would probably think, I would ask, and I'd want to know, what can people do to kind of finish out this year? Think about what they should do in a post-COVID world to keep their, financial successes going, right? And are there tools that are out there that can help people kind of think about this, so they're not alone? I know we talk about in COVID, we're all in this together, but, we are, as far as understanding the pandemic together, and we're experiencing work circumstances a little bit similarly in some cases, but we don't have the same lived experience based on who we are and then the economic seat we sit on through it, right? Not everybody gets to go take a luxurious Airbnb off on an island and hide out during COVID, right? I know some families like that. That's not most of us. And
Right.
so, what are the things I should be thinking about today to kind of set myself up for what's next, that help that help keep me in alignment with my
Any
values?
examples you could give or share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I really like, so I keep, pretty close tabs on, and some of it's on the investment side, but through the Business Roundtable, for example, and this kind of help. This is a group where Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, one of the
Mm-hmm.
largest asset gatherer in the world, certainly this country. But the Business Roundtable is populated with many CEOs who are trying to help change the story for corporate responsibility, right? And expanding stakeholder capitalism. And I like their publications. I like what they're thinking about and what they produce. And I would look to some of that research if I were an employee and an investor, thinking about, okay, how do I situate myself in the best places to be, making reaching optimal earning potential? And so, whether I need to skill up, meet the demands of the future workplace that now look extraordinarily different than they did just a year ago. We have all kinds of new ideas around workforce mobility that didn't even present to many of us as realistic as little as 9 months ago. And kind of looking to these leaders, and I use a lot of the research just on the investment landscape myself, to kind of build plans around, whether they're my financial plans, retirement savings plans, my charitable giving plans, so that I set myself up for success with a little bit of awareness and just self-guided information. And there's floods of investment research just by reaching out to me, obviously can help do personalized plans. But if I were someone thinking about, okay, how do I think about the next administration? What does that mean for, some of my goals with the environment or with some of the sustainable
Mm-hmm.
corporations and how they're being governed? I'd look to these resources to start helping myself answer these questions. And and that would be it's really eye-opening because one of the things I focus on, and I know we're out of time, but I think it's important because COVID has really opened up how many people are living in poverty. And I run a nonprofit on the side that's all around poverty alleviation strategies, really through a social entrepreneurship project-based lens. And the idea
Good for you.
there is that, I am really, really hopeful because now we have this, one of the levers of poverty is obviously the immobility of certain workers to live in cheaper places, right? To keep the conversation simple. And so what if I can, and also be kind of confined to a zip code for education that might not be a very good zip code to live in K through 12. Right. And so, what if I can actually artificially create different digital spaces now through education and workforce mobility that now change the story for poverty and allow a worker to live in a lower cost place but work remotely for a very high paying, high functioning, high wage job and not have it all go to living in that city, right? That's a new paradigm that we really haven't in this country faced with scale. And that gets me really excited about what's next and how we educate. And if I can artificially recreate my zip code and be in through digital content have a different public education experience in a wealthier zip code than the one I'm living in, like you start to change the story and the especially in our early learners and who we are all hopeful become productive tax-paying citizens to
Right.
feed the tax base that we all need to support all the things that we want, right? So those are
Help
big
level the
picture
playing field.
things. Yeah, and those are big picture things I'm always thinking about. But there's an intersection of how we invest to do that, and then how do we show up, each one of us, even the three of us, in our communities representing that kind of equity. So I kind of leave you with that. But that gets me really excited about the future.
Good. So, Dan, do you want to take that one last question, and then let's do a shameless plug for Karen, for if anyone wants to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. If people are interested in getting in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so through my firm, sbsbllc.com, And my contact information is there. I am the director of our financial planning division and head of our impact and ESG research. And so that's the very best way. And my email is there. I'd give my email. It's Karen, Karen.Wawrzaszek, WAWRZASZEK at sbsbllc.com. But going to the website will get you there as well. And I thank you for the plug. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
And we'll put that on our website as well. We put all
Thank
of our
you.
contact information. So value-ability.com under the content tab, and then check out episode 40, and we'll have all of Karen's contact info there as well for you. So our final question, and I've been better at prepping our guests for this, but I have a feeling that you'll be able to nail it without pre-preparation. What one bit of advice, or maybe it's just a saying that has been shared with you by either a mentor or a family member or a teacher at some point in your life, is particularly meaningful to you?
Oh gosh. So it's about control. So I'm a person who really believes in free will, right? And so it's, we can't control how we come into this earth, but we can control how we leave it and who we influence on the way out. And I live by that. And it's my kind of daily thought, daily mantra is it's so wonderful to wake up on this side of the soil and make good choices about that so that you leave in a place of influence, and others can follow. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really, really enjoyed it. Everyone, Karen Wawrzaszek, and we will continue on with the rest of our episode and bid you farewell. And again, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Yes, thank you, Karen.
thank you and have a great rest of the week.
You do the same. Powerful session.
Thank you.
So I once again want to thank Karen for joining us this week, and we are going to turn to our article review for this week. Very somber topic. Entrepreneur and leader Tony Hsieh passed away recently, and our article, Tony Hsieh's American Tragedy, the Self-Destructive Last Months of the Zappos Visionary, jumped out at me for a number of reasons. And I'll start out, Philip. The main thing that resonated with me when I started reading about this topic, I knew secondhand this story. I wasn't a huge user of the Zappos service, and I know that it had a very devout following and that his leadership style had created really a great sense of loyalty within their customer base, and that many people were impacted by his passing. And the thing that leapt out at me right away is how tied sometimes success is with, I don't want to say mental illness directly, but with some sort of obsessive compulsive type of personality, right? Many people that are very successful have this inner drive that is coming from someplace that isn't always positive, right? And they harness that, and it really seemed to jump out at me that this drive of his to have people around him and to connect people in the end became his undoing, and also really highlighted that thing that's also one of the things that I knew when I first met you, but you really focused me in on, is that our greatest strengths are also often our largest weakness. And those things that make you successful sometimes are also things that you really struggle with. This is highlighted in my life hugely in the fact that my dad, who I've talked about a number of times, was bipolar, and many bipolar people stop taking their medication because they miss the manic phase of that, and because they get a lot of things done, and they're used to it, and so when they get normalized, it really changes their character in a way. And so that's really what leapt out to me right away, was just how big that, strengths and weaknesses being tied together seemed in this case.
I've got some thoughts too. After I read it, first of all, it's tragedy. There's no doubt about it. And but the good things that came out of his leadership, and as I look at it, is they looked at and they asked their employees, radical concept, right? What's important to them, and what do they want? What does a good company look like? And they've said they all wanted to work with a company that uh, included valuing employee inputs through their personalities over their position. So that and then passion. People who are generally have a strong personalities, and are very passionate, and they will go through walls to accomplish their vision. And don't ever underestimate that vision, because people without a vision will perish. Now, the other, I also liked he also saw challenges as opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't view it as something that was going to hold him back. Okay, what is the solution here? What I want to applaud Jewel on, she was got to be careful with success, right? There's no doubt. And in this, the emperor without any clothes, he'd double people's salaries if they'd moved to Park City, just looking for yes
Right.
people. She shows up, she's there, supposed to be there a week. She does a little gig around the fireplace, instrumental, 50 minutes to some of his close friends, etc. There. She leaves the next day, and she wrote him a letter. And I applaud her for her courage. She was willing to call him out, and she said, "I can't stay there. You're not in the right mind, and you're just going to you're self-destructing."
That's a huge amount of loyalty as a friend, and then the ability to take that risk to speak that truth to someone
Oh,
and say, hey, these things aren't right and you need to address them. And unfortunately, he wasn't in a space to be able to accept that feedback, obviously.
no, right. And so it comes down with people with those behaviors. It's self-destructive. It's because it's a me disease, addictions. It's all about me. And oftentimes it's a cover up to numb themselves because of either the shame or the pain that they're feeling. And again, it is a disease. It's genetic. We probably should have a topic on it sometime. You can do this, show the science of it. But anyway, because people, where I'm going with that, and the one thing, it's kind of it is a pet peeve of mine. People say, well, they just don't have willpower. Hello, let me ask you, can you sit and buy a case of beer, or a big bottle of whatever is your favorite drink is, and finish it? I can't. I couldn't drink 24 bottles of beer. To me, that's willpower. These people have willpower. As he shows, he has strong willpower. He was able to create a lot of things. But but having that courage, if you love someone enough or care about someone enough, you're going to call them out. Now, whether or not, it's through an intervention with love, but it's two different ways of doing those interventions. But the get ready, unless they're ready to accept, it's not gonna help them out. It might be a short-term reprieve, and at best, what you've done is you shored up their bottom. At least you can, maybe that, because you started the process. It's unfortunate it never got there.
And the truth of the matter is that if you, this is a prime example, if you don't speak, they're going to continue in that downward spiral anyway, and you're going to lose that friend. And if you do speak, it's possible that you might be able to shake them out of that spiral. But if you don't, I mean, if she hadn't said anything, he would have stayed on that downward trajectory anyway. So yeah, I agree. Very tragic, but I just thought given that impact that he's had on corporate America over the last 2 decades, that it was worthwhile circling around that topic and bringing that into our article review for this week. If you have topics or questions that you would like us to cover on the podcast, you can email us at info@value-ability.com. Again, that's info@value-ability.com, or reach out to us through social media, value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab, and all of our links are there. Wherever you find us, please like, review, subscribe, and share. As mentioned earlier, we will be off for the next 2 weeks, so I'm not sure what our next episode will be, but check back in the beginning of January for episode 41 of the Valuability Podcast. Please reach out to us. Let us know in the new year, what are some topics that you would like us to cover? We know we have a number of consistent listeners out there, so please email us, reach out to us on social media. Let us know what topics you would like us to cover in the new year. As always, thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next time. And remember that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. This is a podcast collaboration, not a peer-reviewed journal or a sponsored publication. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this podcast, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. It is the listener's responsibility to verify their own facts. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this podcast. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast. Before acting on information on this podcast, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances, and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions are not reflective of the position of any entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity.